What about the political system? That's right, no one even mentions that at all in terms of changing the two-party system. It's like you've got to have two parties, that's the only way. You don't even have someone else in the debate, do you? Where are the Greens in the debate? Where are Palmer's party or Katter's party or any of those guys? Or even One Nation now, it's two parties. LNP, Labour, that's all it is. And also, do you get to vote for your Prime Minister? Do you get to vote for your Cabinet? No. You can change Prime Minister overnight. I think it's Malcolm Turnbull right now. It could be someone else tomorrow. He can change the Cabinet, can change all of that can all change overnight. What about Governor General? We're a Commonwealth. That debate comes up now and again, but nothing really happens. Still stays the same. How about freedom of speech? How's that being curtailed? There's something known as political correctness. When is that even mentioned in debate that maybe we're being a little bit too politically correct? Maybe there's certain things that we can't say that's upsetting people. Supposedly upsetting people. Is it actually upsetting people though? Some of the weird things, like on my previous job, the word tracking apparently is offensive to Indigenous people in Australia. To Aboriginal people, because it reminds them of when they used to be tracked and killed. Wow. I would have thought actually tracking and killing would be way more offensive. But apparently that word is. Almost any word, it can come to that point, almost any word can be considered politically incorrect, to be offensive or whatever. And you know what that does? That reduces freedom of speech. You can't say what you want to say if certain words are pulled from your vocabulary. And what is being done about that? What about surveillance on our own people? Yeah, that's right. Apparently they're watching us to keep us safe. Keep the terrorists away. Also get rid of the rubbish bins at stations, you know. People are going to put a bomb there. They could put it in a bag, couldn't they? But no, get rid of the rubbish bins. So we're being watched everywhere we go. Crazy. You can even watch in your own home by your own television. Where's the debate on that? Let's get rid of some of the surveillance. Nah, there's any debate, it should be. Any debate that's going on, it's like, let's have more surveillance. Yeah? And that's not even a debate, because the other side don't usually argue with it. Also a big one as well, for democracy. What about referendums? As I mentioned earlier, Switzerland have quite a few. It's not an awful lot. I think it's only like 10 a year or something like that. It's something. What do we get? One every 20 years? There's no people power. You think about it. In politics, you've got two parties. Really one party. Split into two factions. Controlled opposition. Disagree or debate, almost nothing of relevance. Big decisions, just like that. They can do that without any consent from the people. Crazy. How about the environment? When you hear environment, you only hear two words. Climate change. Interesting, right? What about all the other environmental issues? I'm not even going to mention about the climate change debate. Okay, there's quite a debate on that, but you know, let's look at other things. Like pollution by industry. Just air pollution, water pollution, all of that stuff. It all gets thrown in under climate change, doesn't it? What about the meat industry? Even if you put climate change in there, they're actually one of the biggest contributors to climate change. Bigger than the transport sector. And they also contribute to air pollution. You know, the methane and all coming out of the cows. What about the water pollution? All the cow dung and manure and the pig's poo all flushing into our rivers. What about the land they take up and the deforestation? What about the food requirement? They need a lot of food. This food could be used to feed starving people. It's not all about the animals. What about people that are starving? There's so many starving people in the world. What about just air pollution in general, water pollution? It all gets thrown under that. And in Australia, deletion of the ozone layer and radiation. That was talked about for a while. Okay, let's get rid of the CFCs, but there's still a gaping hole above us in the ozone layer. You go out in Australia, I'm getting burned after 15-20 minutes if I don't have any sunscreen or sunblock on. And sunscreen and sunblock generally doesn't seem to work anyway. And there's even studies indicating that sunblock and sunscreen could actually cause cancer as well. Amazingly, isn't it? You know? So the best thing is you put your hat on and you wear more clothes. Sunbathing at the beach is not a good idea in Australia. What about fracking? Some debate on that, but nothing's really changing, you know, and the pollution that's caused through that. Climate change debate. I said I wouldn't talk about it. I'm sorry, I think I am talking about it, because there's another side to the climate change debate. And have you heard about the Little Ice Age? We talk about highest temperatures in history. We're only going back a couple of hundred years. The Earth's been around billions of years, yeah? And the temperature's gone up and down. And sure, I don't think there's much dispute about whether there's actual climate change. Sure, the climate's changing. But when we talk about climate change, we're talking about us doing it with carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide. Even though there's proof that water vapor is actually a bigger contributor to it anyway. And is it necessarily such a bad thing, carbon dioxide? You know, a richer carbon dioxide atmosphere actually means crops can grow quicker through photosynthesis. So, what about alternative energy debates? That's been fairly weak, hasn't it, so far? Like, even some of the alternative energies, you talk about wind farms, you're talking about some of these hydraulic things, I can't remember what they're called now, in the ocean and all that, and potentially they're causing harm as well. Like wind farms has been known to hurt bats and birds and things like that. It causes problems. So you've got to be a balanced debate in terms of energy. And like I mentioned before with energy, what about Tesla and his stuff? We're talking about free energy potentially. You don't want to touch that because it's not making you money. What about the economy? As an economist, it's probably something you're probably thinking about, okay, what if this all had to do with economics? All of this is related in some way social, so it is related to economics as well. And you can debate about a lot of these things. And if you have a functioning democracy, or any other functioning form of government, what I like to say, all of these debates should be on the table and they should be discussed, and people should be kept informed. So let's look at the economy. Widening income disparity. Don't hear too much about that, but the 1% is pulling away from all the others. You look at the stats on that, and that's why I disagree with using real GDP per capita. You know, hey, it's going up because the rich are getting richer. The rest of us are staying about the same. So that's interesting. What about employment versus working hours? That's what I mentioned before, is that, you know, we're working all these more hours for what, you know? You've got these productivity gains. You shouldn't have to work all those hours. Rising household debt. That's a big thing as well. So many people are in debt. So many people need credit cards. Why? Because of the brainwashing. You've got to buy all this stuff you don't need. That's why you get into all this debt. Buy and buy and buy. And you've got all these other things keeping you in place. Higher electricity, higher mortgage. You've got all your council rates and stuff. All that is fairly fixed, eating a big chunk of your money. And then you've got your interest payments, paying back the interest and all this stuff that you don't actually need. What about consumerism and materiality? So I mentioned just now, people obsessed with material wealth when there's other things that can make you happy. You don't just have to Google it. People that are happy, what are they doing? Are they standing next to their car? Yay, ooh, big Mercedes. No, they're not. You see them out and running around and enjoying life with very little money spent anyway. Oh, what about taxation laws? I know there's some debate on that, but nothing's really changing, isn't there? Money's being pulled directly out of the taxpayer, being thrown into things that don't benefit us. Sure, you know, income tax, look how high it is. You're paying like 30-40% on income tax. All that money's going to the government so they can give it to their friends. The private sector, the 1%ers. What about manufacturing? In Australia, do you know what our manufacturing's like? It's non-existent. Everything goes and gets, manufactured in either China or Thailand or whatever. And saying that, it's not like they're getting rich out of it. We're exploiting them anyway. The Chinese are making hardly anything out of a lot of the stuff we buy. What about competitive production? What about hemp clothes and things like that? Things that could be made very cheap that are not even looked at because there's no money in it. How about we don't focus so much on GDP, unemployment, the participation rate? Yeah, unemployment could be fixed. Less working hours. Look at Indonesia. They've got a high unemployment rate. The people that are working are also working 14, 15-hour days. If they all worked 6-hour days, then you wouldn't have an unemployment problem. You wouldn't have a problem with people being overworked either. It just makes your workforce a little bit more uncompetitive. But, you know, so what? So big companies are just ripping them off, taking all their money. You want to be focused on something. How about you focus on happiness? Look at the happiness statistics, yeah? Another thing, central banks. When are we going to discuss that? Should they be privately owned or should they be government owned? Private is a disaster. Government isn't also much better either, is it really? But what debate is that? Who controls interest rates? Private company controls your interest rates. They control your money supply. They lend money to the government, comes from a private company. It has all that power over your government, a private company. Can you imagine that? Have you ever heard of the Rothschilds? And their ownership and all of that? This is one of those things that's going to be very difficult to prove, and all the people would do that. There is some sort of evidence out there suggesting about the Rothschild empire. I won't go too much into that. But what we can say, though, is they're not government owned, they're not government controlled, they're privately controlled. And they can manipulate currencies. That's what the Chinese have been doing. So where does that leave us? This diagram here I found actually quite useful. So you can see we're right at the bottom there. We're being dictated to by our top professionals and our top bureaucrats, our so-called elected officials that are actually more like appointed by the guys above them, which is your corporate elite and your big bankers and the central bankers. You can even take it a one step further depending on what you believe in. And I actually do, I actually quite strongly believe in this, that there's actually a higher level even above that. You know, called, what was it, David Icke calls them the archons, that are dictating things down to these people. And that sounds logical to me. There's so much we don't know. Like visible light is just a fraction of what we can see. So there's so much going around us that we can't see and going on. And logically it makes sense. There's a controlling force. Like you talk about animals, they're slaves to us and they have no problem. And to the archons or the Chitauri or the Anunnaki and all that, we're slaves to them. So how do we fit in? We fit in right at the bottom. As in, we don't have a say. And that's not democracy. I'm sorry. That fits right back into my definition of dictatorship and the controlled opposition. So what next? Where do we go from now? What's the next thing? You can't uprise. That wouldn't make any sense. Small country? Go and break Australia up into 100 little countries? Not necessarily like the idea of that. We all can't be Switzerland. And people are scattered out all over the place. There are a few solutions that are on the board. But I think it's important to remember is, we've got to look at a problem and we've got to logically find a way around that. It could be, you could have a great solution, or it could be simply just removing the problem. But how do you get to that point? There's some good ideas out there. There's the Venus Project. I'm not 100% in agreement on that. There's still a certain level of dictatorship in terms of how your town or city has to be laid out. I like the idea of not having a government. I like the idea that there's no dictatorship. I like the idea that people can, I guess, be ahead of their own field of expertise and take it in from that angle. I like the idea that you don't have money anymore. That's a big part of the Venus Project. And you're laying things out in an optimal fashion. And how things are done. It's thought through like an engineer, because the engineer guy came up with it. Some good ideas on that. What about the whole status versus anarchist thing? What about anarchy? You say the word anarchy, people are like, oh, it's bad. Yeah. But look what we have now. We call statism, as I was talking about authority and government and dictatorships. How does all that work? Is that really working out that much better? Anarchy doesn't mean just disorder. It doesn't mean it means without rulers. It means there's no government. Which, in a way, that's kind of like how the Venus Project works. People get to determine what they do in life by themselves. Don't have someone else telling them exactly what to do. You've got a lot more freedom. Some people say, well, just be all lazy and rot. I don't think that would happen at all. Or you could have a hybrid approach. Pull lots of different ideas together and see what works. It could all work for different countries, couldn't it? Certainly not the way that we're looking at our representative democracy, aka dictatorship. So let's just take a quote. I briefly mentioned Einstein. This is the exact words that he said. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So that comes to the part where I said about rebellion and uprising and all of that. You wouldn't solve that because that's the existing way of doing things. That's the existing government's approach to things. Go to war, force countries to follow what we tell them, impose force on your people. They don't behave themselves, they don't do what you say, throw them in prison, hit them with fines. Control, violence, dictatorship, control. We have very violent governments, whether you're in the UK or whether you're in the US or Australia. They are violent, and they will use violence against you if you don't do as you're told. We can't use that approach against them. We can't go out and fight them that way. We've got to do it a different way. You can learn a lot from Gandhi from that. You can defeat them with love, but you can also defeat them with non-compliance. There's 99% of us, there's 1% of them. If you just stop following everything, just stop doing everything you're told, think for yourselves, you're more likely to reach a solution on that. Sort of takes me now to the end of this video. This has been quite a long video. There's a lot of things I want to cover off on. Most of the things I only touch briefly because there are so many things, so many issues and stuff, problems that are not debated. And that's where the economist comes in. So you're wondering how economics fits into all of this. Well, it does, because you've got the economics perspective, and we can analyze all of these problems. But it needs to be open, and it needs to be open debate on all of these things. Because a lot of them is not. A lot of them is like, nah, that's not happening. Vaccines are safe. It's all closed, you know? The doors are already closed. And you can't do that. You've got to do your research. You've got to get your facts for yourself. Some of the things you won't necessarily trust what I have to say, that's fine. That's actually good. You don't have to believe what I say. You just take what I've got and you do some of the research and see what you find. You can tell a lot of the stuff that I'm saying is fairly accurate. There'll be new research that will come along, may disprove a few things, but, you know, I look at 911 as well. September 11th, people say, you know, nah, just listen to the government, what they tell you. You look at the facts, it's overwhelming, absolutely overwhelming. There's so many videos, so many YouTube videos and all of that. It explains what happened and how it's utterly, totally impossible. I kind of felt that the first time I saw it. Like, yeah, it just can't happen. So you've got to open your mind, you've got to think for yourself. That is the key. Think for yourself. Anyway, thank you for watching my video. If you like this video, click the like button. If you're interested in more videos, I may not be doing so many more to this extent, but I'll be looking at a lot of those issues that I talked about in a little bit more detail, a little bit more focus. So you can hit the subscribe button, there'll be a few more videos on those. I'm doing my thing on vegan economics. That indirectly feeds into that, and I mentioned about animals, so you know, you may be interested in that, and that would be great. So anyway, don't forget to subscribe if you want to see any of that stuff. I'd like to thank you for watching this video, and if you've got to this point, I'd like to thank you for staying interested for this long. See ya.